All right, we have to move along here. So how do we do this, right? How do we do 150 years of American history, in a way that's effective? Oops, push the button. Well, what I'm going to do is pick 4 themes, and 4 big themes that run through American history, starting, and we'll just pick it up right after the Civil War, and take them, in big chunks, intensely in that late 19th, early 20th century period, and then see how they go all the way up to the present day. So just a couple quick things. I teach at College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've written a few books. Yeah, there's some Holy Cross people here. Thank you for coming. I'm on Twitter. I know you don't look like a Twitter audience out here. But anyway, and I have a podcast about which I will talk a little bit later. So history. I know that some of you are here, maybe because somebody dragged you here, and I know that history sometimes is a word that some people have a little bit of aversion to, or it brings them back to junior year of high school with, the worst teacher ever. And it's kind of a, not to cast aspersions on high school football coaches. I was a high school football coach for 1 year. But, some of the memories we have of a really bad history class that is just a lot of blah, 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 a lot of facts, a lot of dates. So it's incumbent, on behalf of the historical profession, I'm really sorry. B, I'm going to make it up to you. We're going to have some fun today, and we're going to learn a lot. None of this, so you have to sit up straight. You are allowed to sleep in my class. You just can't snore or drool. So let's start out by the way I always start out, which is talking about history. What makes history not just fun and interesting, but a little bit deeper to understanding what history is all about. One way to think about history is the study of conflict. And this is really true in general, but it's also really true in democracies. And we have, wars, we have revolutions, we have riots, actual conflict. But we also have, fundamentally, throughout our history, conflict of ideas, conflict of vision. If you think in your head, any moment in history, American history, world history, it's always about conflict, about ideas. Should women get the right to vote? Should the 13 colonies break away from the Union to become an independent nation? These are fundamental questions, and we argue about them. So we sometimes have this idea that the past is this placid, peaceful place, and we live in such fractious times. Oh my. Well, we do live in fractious times. Oh my. But we've always lived to some degree in fractious times. So history becomes more interesting when we think about it in terms of study of conflict. Second is thinking about how history actually operates. We know that great people in history do great things. Andrew Carnegie, Eleanor Roosevelt, long list of people who have moved history by their actions, by their deeds. But history is also moved by everyday people. And this is just a term from sociology, setting a goal and pursuing it, agency, acting on your own behalf or acting on a collective behalf. And if we think about history, a lot of history is made by nameless, faceless people. We do know that Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves, but the reason he does it, he doesn't want to do it. We know this from the historical record. He's anti-slavery, but he's also not an abolitionist. He does it because tens, then 20s, then hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of nameless, faceless, enslaved people run away. They self-emancipate, and it causes this huge crisis in the first year of the Civil War, and Lincoln tries to stop it and then realizes he can't. And then he says we have to kind of hitch our wagon to emancipation. We have no choice. It's going to happen anyway. We can try to oppose it. It's folly. So people taking action make history, everyday people. History is also the study of choices, and this is one of the reasons why some people find history so boring or maybe uninteresting, is that we think of it as just this one damn thing after another, just a march of events. But nobody knows what's going to happen. None of us know what's going to happen in the next 15 minutes. I mean, did you know, what were you doing at 8:45 on September 11th, 2001? Right? You're on the subway, you're making coffee, you're at your desk. We all remember exactly where we were. But we had no idea what was going to happen. And even then, we didn't know what was going to happen as the hours unfolded. So history, none of it's inevitable. It's a series of choices and things that people make, so that when you look at, say, the 1850s, it looks like the Civil War is just going to happen, right? You've got all these events, the Fugitive Slave Act and Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas and the Dred Scott case, John Brown's raid. All of those things seem to be bringing us to civil war, but that's not inevitable. There were thousands of choices that could have been made all along the way to, if not avert the Civil War, delay the Civil War, or do, there are many other options on the table. So nothing is inevitable. Things seem inevitable in retrospect, and when you look back. And then finally, we need to make history relevant. History needs to speak to us, not just be an interesting dive into the past about people and events. We have to, history has a lot to tell us, a lot to do for us if we pay attention to it. I was listening to a podcast called On Being, which is one of my favorite podcasts, and they interviewed Isabel Wilkerson, who's written this fantastic book called The Warmth of Other Suns, about the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North in the 20th century. And the interviewer was asking her, so what kind of book is this? And she said, well, it's got economics, it has philosophy, it has psychology, it has sociology, anthropology, but mostly it's history. And then she went on this fantastic riff about history. She said, history's so important. If you go to the doctor, history's so important when it comes to solving our problems today and into the future. She said, when you go to the doctor, before the doctor begins prescribing anything, what does he do? What does she do? She says, fill out some forms, tell me your history. What's your medical history? What's happened to you? What illnesses have you gone through? What conditions do you have, and so forth? And then maybe page 2, tell me about your parents. Who had the heart attacks? Who had cancer? Who had high blood pressure? And page 3, even better, if you can, tell me about your grandparents. Medical history. Then, and only then, after pondering all these details, will the doctor begin to think about how he or she can solve your problems. And that's a way of thinking about how history is not just a fascinating dive into the past and tales of heroism and so forth. It is a story of events and things that can speak to us today. We have to know our history if we're going to solve our contemporary problems and make a better future for ourselves. Okay, that sermon is now officially over.